Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we start, please tell me in the comments where you are and what time you are listening to this narration. We want to know where and when these documented accounts happen. In the fall of 1893, the county records of Stone County, Missouri, said that Martha and Jeremiah Hollister, a reclusive couple who had moved to a remote valley near the White River, about 12 miles east of Galena, had identical twin boys. The birth certificate, which was found in 1962 during the county archives reorganization, has a strange note in the margin from the attending physician, Dr. Samuel Whittam. Born with teeth. Mother refuses to nurse. Highly unusual disposition in both infants. This strange note would be the first documented oddity in what would become one of the most disturbing cases in Ozark history. The Hollister family lived in a 2-story wooden house that Jeremiah built himself. It was at the end of what locals called Crooked Trail, a winding path that went through a thick forest and ended in a small clearing where the house stood. Tax records from 1891 show that the property was mostly wooded and covered 86 acres, with a small area cleared for subsistence farming. The McAllister family, who lived about 3 miles away, were the closest neighbors. This was a long way away in the remote Ozarks of the late 1800s. The Carters were Martha Hollister's family, and they had lived in the area for a long time. Her first family moved to the area in the 1822 and were known for not getting involved with other people. Folklore from the area, written down by WPA writers in the 1932, says that the Carters followed old ways, a term used in the Ozarks to describe families who kept traditions that were around before Christians came to the area. Most of the time, these practices were just harmless folk medicine and superstition, but in the whispers of nearby communities, they sometimes took on darker meanings. An 1887 ledger from the Galena General Store has several entries for Mamaker's Carter's tonics and remedies. This suggests that Martha's mother may have been known for making herbal medicines. The same ledger says that a Carter woman requests unusual ingredients, cinnabar powder, and specific animal organs not typically used in common remedies. The storekeeper wrote on the side, "Charged double? Questions not welcome." But Jeremiah Hollister was not from the Ozarks. County records show that he moved from Massachusetts to this area in 1887, but the exact details of his move are still unclear. The marriage certificate that was filed in Stone County in 1889 says that his job was natural philosopher. At the time, this was an old-fashioned term that could mean anything from a scientist to someone who was interested in the natural world. A letter found in the Springfield College archives in 1964, written by a former co-worker of Hollister's, says that he was brilliant, but becoming more and more erratic in his search for knowledge about human nature and its extremes. Robert Jenkins, an amateur historian, looked into Hollister's past more closely in 1965 and found a link to Miskatonic University in Massachusetts, where Hollister had worked as a research assistant in the Department of Anthropology for a short time. University records from that time are few and poorly kept, but they show that he was fired in 1886 for conduct unbecoming and research directions deemed morally questionable. There is no record of what this research was about. The birth registry says that the twins, Elijah and Ezra, were born on the 17th of September, 1893. There isn't much information about what happened after they were born for the first 4 years of their lives. The Hollisters, who were already cut off from the rest of the world by geography, became even more private after the twins were born. Martha, who had gone to Galena for supplies from time to time, was not seen in town for almost 2 years after the birth. Jeremiah made all the trips he needed to make by himself. The ledgers for Garrison's General Store show that the Hollister family bought a lot of different things after the twins were born. Before September 1893, they bought things like flour, sugar, coffee, and sometimes tools or fabric, which was normal for a frontier family. After the baby was born, records show that the family bought a lot more meat than usual, especially for a family of 4 with young children. A note from December 1893 says, "J. Hollister wants the whole hind quarter of beef. Price was negotiated." The customer got more and more upset during the transaction and said they had special dietary needs. The first recorded event involving the twins happened in the spring of 1897 when they were 3.5 years old. Eleanor McAllister, the wife of the nearest neighbor, kept a journal. On the 12th of April 1897, she wrote, "Martha brought the children today, first time seeing them. Identical in every way, except their eyes. Strange children do not speak, but seem to understand each other. Martha seems afraid. Asked if my William could come play. I said no, before thinking. Something not right about those boys." An entry from April 15th goes into more detail. Martha came back alone and talked about her problems with the children in private. She said they wouldn't eat anything but meat, preferably raw. Jeremiah supports this, saying it's normal for boys to grow. Martha said the twins only sleep during the day and stay active at night. She said they talk to each other in whispers that she can't understand. The most worrying thing was that she showed me marks on her arms, small crescent-shaped wounds. She said the boys bit her when she tried to give them bread instead of meat. She cried when she talked about them. I offered her to stay with us, but she said Jeremiah would never let it happen. The McAllister Journal, which was found in a family trunk during a house demolition in 1958, is one of the few accounts of the Hollister twins from that time. Eleanor's observations continue sporadically over the next year, noting that Martha began visiting more frequently, always with the twins, who she described as unnaturally quiet and watching everything with those different eyes. An entry from June 1897 states, "Martha brought twins again. They've grown remarkably since April. Appear more like 5 than 3. Still refuse to speak in presence of others. Martha says at home they converse constantly in their private language." Jeremiah documents their speech in what she calls his research journals. Martha increasingly gaunt, jumpy at small noises. When twins wandered to the edge of the property to examine rabbit snares, she whispered that sometimes at night she hears them outside her bedroom door, scratching softly, speaking their strange words. Says Jeremiah tells her it's natural curiosity, but she's taken to barricading her door after he falls asleep. Galena school records show that the twins were never officially enrolled. This was not uncommon for families living far away in the Ozarks at the time. However, church records from the Methodist congregation in Galena note a curious entry in the pastor's registry from October 1898, visited Hollister home at Martha's request. She wishes the children baptized, but away from the congregation. Jeremiah opposed, witnessed unusual behavior in the twin boys. They speak only to each other in what sounds like gibberish. Martha says they understand English perfectly, but refuse to speak it. Jeremiah claims it is a language of their own devising and shows pride in this. Disturbed by his attitude and the children's vacant stares, left without performing baptism. Reverend Wilkins elaborated in a private letter to a fellow clergyman, discovered in 1,966 inches, the archives of a Springfield church. I cannot adequately convey the sense of wrongness that pervaded that household. The children, now 5 years of age, exhibit none of the natural exuberance or curiosity one expects in boys of that age. They observed me with an unnervingly adult calculation. When I produced a Bible from my bag, they retreated to corners of the room, watching from a distance. The mother, Martha, seems a prisoner in her own home, constantly looking to Jeremiah before speaking. When I expressed concern about the children's welfare, suggesting perhaps medical consultation might be beneficial, Jeremiah became immediately hostile, stating that the children were perfectly adapted to their nature and that conventional understanding cannot apply to exceptional cases. Most disturbing was his insistence on showing me his documented observations of the twins page after page of transcribed language and behavioral notes. He spoke of them as subjects rather than sons. This report by Reverend Thomas Wilkins is the first official record of the twins' strange behavior and the rising tension in the Hollister home. Eleanor McAllister later wrote that Elijah's eyes dark as coal, Ezra's pale as morning sky, though they are otherwise mirrors of each other. This makes it clear what was meant by the twins' eyes being different. By 1899, people in Galena and nearby towns were starting to talk about the strange Hollister twins. There is a note next to Martha Hollister's name in the ledger of Garrison's General Store that says, No credit, Jeremiah says, all accounts to be settled by him alone. Martha looked nervous, and the twins waited outside. There were more and more rumors about strange noises coming from the Hollister property. Oral histories collected by Missouri State University in the 1950 seconds, decades after the fact, said that hunters and trappers had started to stay away from the area around the Hollister property. Things weren't right around that place. Game disappeared. It was like everything with blood in it knew to stay away, except the birds. There were more ravens there than I've ever seen in one place, and they were quiet, just like those boys. The winter of 1899 to 1900 was especially bad in the Ozarks. Heavy snow cut off many remote homes for weeks at a time. This winter was when things at the Hollister farm first took a dark turn. In early February 1900, Jeremiah Hollister came to Galena and was very upset. He asked Dr. Whittam, the same doctor who had delivered the twins, for help, saying that Martha was very sick. The Missouri Historical Society has a copy of the doctor's log, which tells about his trip to the Hollister home and what he found there. February 9th, 1900. Called to the Hollister home. Martha suffering from severe malnutrition and what appears to be nervous exhaustion. Patient is delirious, speaking of hunger that cannot be satisfied, and the boy's unnatural appetites. Physical examination reveals no organic disease, but numerous small, partially healed wounds on arms and shoulders consistent with human bite marks. Patient extremely anemic. Prescribed rest, proper nutrition, and suggested removal to town for observation. Jeremiah refused latter suggestion with unusual vehemence. Observed twins watching from doorway throughout examination, disturbing stillness to the children. Neither spoke in my presence. Unusual home environment, multiple locks on interior doors. Jeremiah's study contains concerning scientific materials, including anatomical drawings of unknown origin and journals filled with what appears to be phonetic transcriptions in an alphabet I do not recognize. Martha grew agitated when twins approached and had to be sedated. Will return in 3 days to check condition. A personal letter from Dr. Whittam to a colleague in St. Louis, never sent but found among his effects after his death in 1926, contains additional observations not included in his official log. I fear what is happening in that isolated house is beyond the scope of conventional medicine. The twins, now 6 years old, exhibit physical development more appropriate to children of 10, yet with none of the emotional or social maturity one would expect. They move in perfect unison, mirroring each other's gestures without apparent conscious effort. Most disturbing was their reaction when I drew blood from Martha's arm for testing. Both children became immediately alert, focusing intensely on the syringe. I observed their nostrils flaring, as if scenting the air. After completing my examination, I discovered the blood sample missing from my bag. When confronted, Jeremiah claimed ignorance, but I observed a faint reddish stain at the corner of one twin's mouth. I did not press the issue, feeling it unwise to provoke confrontation while isolated at the property. I confess to you, James, I left that house with a profound sense of dread, which I cannot rationalize through medical understanding. Dr. Whittam's promised follow-up visit was pushed back because it kept snowing. When he got back to the Hollister property on February 17, he saw that Martha's health had gotten much worse. His log says, patient now suffering from what appears to be complete nervous collapse. Refuses to speak except to whisper to me when Jeremiah was momentarily absent. They are not right. What they hunger for is not natural. Unable to elaborate as Jeremiah returned. Twins again observed watching silently. Jeremiah insists Martha's condition is improving, despite evidence to the contrary. Offered to take Martha to town. Offer again. Refused. Dr. Whittam wrote in a letter to himself that Martha was getting worse. Weight loss severe. Skin tone gray. Multiple new wounds on neck and upper back. When I tried to look at these injuries, Jeremiah stopped me and said they were from a fall. The marks are clearly bites. Most troubling development, when changing bandages on Martha's arm, I saw the twins in the hallway making synchronous hand gestures toward each other, moving their fingers to their lips. then throat, then stomach, in perfect unison. They looked like they were smiling. I left more sedative with clear instructions that it was for Martha only. I fear it will not be used as directed. The next documented account comes from a letter written by Eleanor McAllister to her sister in Springfield, dated March 3, 1900. Something terrible has happened at the Hollister place. Martha is gone. Jeremiah claims she has gone to stay with relatives in Tennessee for her health, but she would never leave those boys, unnatural as they are. William rode over after hearing strange sounds in the night. Jeremiah would not allow him past the porch, said the boys were ill with fever. William says he saw no sign of packing or travel, no wagon tracks leading from the property, despite recent mud. The twins watched from an upstairs window the entire time he was there, motionless as statues. A letter dated March 10th expresses more worries. William returned to the Hollister place yesterday with Dr. Whittam, who shares our worries about Martha's sudden departure. Jeremiah produced a letter that was supposedly from Martha, saying she had arrived safely in Tennessee. Dr. Whittam noted that the handwriting looked shaky and wasn't like her usual script. When he asked to see the envelope to check the postmark, Jeremiah said he had burned it. What was most disturbing was William's observation that while they were talking to Jeremiah on the porch, he saw movement in an upstairs window that he thought was Martha's face, pale as death, mouth moving as if trying to speak. When he called attention to this, Jeremiah became hostile and told them to leave. By the time William looked back at the window, the figure was gone. There was no record in the county records that Martha Hollister left the area or that she had relatives in Tennessee. The fact that there was no official record of her leaving made the small number of people in the area even more suspicious. But in the isolated Ozark towns of 1,900, official investigations into these kinds of things were rare unless there was strong proof. On the 15th of March 1900, Dr. Whittam sent a telegram to the sheriff's office in Springfield, asking for help in looking into Martha Hollister's disappearance. He said there were suspicious circumstances and serious concerns for her safety. The response, which is still in the county archives in Springfield, says, "Local matter. Address concerns to Stone County authorities. There is no record of Dr. Whittam taking the matter further through official channels." Jeremiah Hollister and the twins were hard to find during the spring and summer of 1900. Several sources said that when Jeremiah came to town for supplies, he looked tired and unkempt. During this time, no one saw the twins at all. People kept talking about it, and hunters and trappers who passed by the Hollister property sometimes said they heard strange, high-pitched sounds, like kids singing, but not in any language or tune that could be understood. In June 1900, a mail carrier named Thomas Grady filed a report saying, "Unusual activity observed at Hollister property. Multiple large holes being dug in yard." When approached for mail delivery, J. Hollister claimed, "Agricultural experiments. Soil appeared unsuitable for planting. Observed twins briefly, working in synchronized movements. Children appear significantly larger than last seen in town, approximately 18 months ago. Growth rate unusual for age." The diary of William McAllister and later county records are the main sources of information about what happened in the fall of 1900. William McAllister saw smoke coming from the Hollister property for several days and decided to look into it on the 12th of October 1900. His diary, which was found among his belongings after he died in 1931, tells the story of what he found. "Rode to Hollister Place today. Smoke coming from behind house, not from chimney. Found Jeremiah burning clothing in pit behind woodshed. Martha's dresses among items being burned." When questioned, he became agitated, claimed Martha had requested new wardrobe for Tennessee climate and old clothes were infected with illness. Twins watched from wood's edge, partially hidden by trees. Called to them, but they retreated further into forest. Observed they now appear as boys of 12 or 13 rather than their actual age of 7. Growth unnaturally accelerated. Jeremiah refused to allow me to speak with them, said they were still recovering from fever. Something very wrong. Saw strange markings carved into trees around property perimeter. Jeremiah explained as scientific notation for botanical study. unconvinced. Most disturbing observation, what appeared to be fresh blood on twins' clothing. Despite distance, could clearly see dark stains on their shirt fronts. When I made to approach them, they retreated in perfect unison, moving backward without looking away from me. Jeremiah positioned himself between us, hand inside coat in threatening manner. Decided prudent to leave, but will return with sheriff. A subsequent entry dated October 14th elaborates, returned to Hollister property with Sheriff Garland, twins nowhere to be seen. Jeremiah initially refused entry to house, relented when sheriff presented warrant based on concerns for Martha's welfare. Interior of home, in state of severe disarray. Evidence of recent occupation only in kitchen and Jeremiah's study. Upstairs rooms appeared untouched for months. Thick layer of dust, except for what sheriff identified as child-size footprints across floors. Martha's bedroom door, secured with padlock. Jeremiah claimed to have lost key. Sheriff forced entry. Room empty. Bed stripped. Dark stains on mattress which Jeremiah attributed to Martha's female complaints before departure. Sheriff collected samples for possible analysis. Most concerning discovery was series of scratch marks on inside of bedroom door, consistent with human fingernails. When confronted, Jeremiah claimed mice or squirrel damage. Sheriff unconvinced, but insufficient evidence for arrest. Before departure, heard what sounded like children's laughter from woods behind property. Jeremiah claimed neighbor children trespassing, but no families with young children live within miles of property. The next day, William McAllister talked to Sheriff Thomas Garland in Galena about his worries. There is a short entry in the sheriff's log, the 13th of October 1900. Complaint from W. McAllister about suspicious circumstances at Hollister property. Concerns about M. Hollister's welfare. Will investigate when duties allow. The promised investigation was put on hold because of a string of cattle mutilations that were happening on farms near the James River, which kept Sheriff Garland busy for the next several weeks. On October 25th, Deputy Sheriff James Wilson filed a report that said, investigated 3 separate incidents of livestock mutilation. In each case, cattle found with precise surgical removal of specific organs. No evidence of predator attack. Farmers report hearing unusual sounds, described as childlike singing, on nights preceding discoveries. Things had changed again by the time the sheriff planned to go to the Hollister property in early November. Jeremiah Hollister showed up in Galena on the 7th of November 1900 looking very upset. He told Sheriff Garland that the twins had gone missing 3 days before. J. Hollister reports twin sons missing since November 4. Claims boys wandered into woods while he was working in field. Organized search party of 6 men to begin tomorrow at first light. Dr. Whittam was in the sheriff's office when Jeremiah arrived. He later wrote in his personal journal, Hollister's demeanor belies his words. He speaks of concern for the twins, yet I observe no genuine distress in his manner. His physical condition has deteriorated markedly. Significant weight loss, pallor suggesting anemia, multiple small scars visible on neck and hands, similar to those I observed on Martha. When I inquired about these marks, he became immediately defensive. Claimed workplace accidents. Most telling was his reaction when Sheriff Garland suggested the twins might have gone looking for their mother. A momentary expression of absolute terror crossed his face before he regained composure. Whatever has occurred at that property, I am increasingly convinced it is beyond ordinary criminal matters. The search for the Hollister twins took 5 days and covered a lot of ground in the thick Ozark forest around the Hollister property. Sheriff Garland's official report filed on November 12 says, no trace of Hollister children found despite extensive search. Unusual circumstances noted at Hollister residence. No children's clothing missing. No footprints leading from house despite recent rain. J. Hollister's behavior increasingly erratic during search. Refused to allow thorough examination of house and outbuildings. Became threatening when suggestion made. Search suspended pending further developments. In 1953, Thomas Jenkins, a member of the search party, gave an oral history interview in which he said, never felt right, that whole search. Sheriff had us looking for 2 7-year-old boys, but Hollister kept calling them the subjects instead of his sons. The land around that property felt wrong too. Dead quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just silence and those ravens watching from the trees. Found something the sheriff didn't put in his report. A little cairn of stones about a mile into the woods from the Hollister place. Under those stones was a cloth bundle that looked like animal bones, all clean like they'd been boiled, arranged in some kind of pattern. Next to it, two identical corn husk dolls facing each other. When I showed the sheriff, he just kicked the whole thing apart and told me not to mention it, said wasn't no point stirring up superstitious talk. After that, Jeremiah Hollister became more and more alone. Garrison's general store ledgers show that he kept buying supplies, but the amounts he bought got smaller over time. There were no documented witnesses who saw the twins, and Jeremiah said they had never come back from the woods, but rumors kept going. Mostly because hunters and trappers said they saw two small figures moving together through the deep woods, or heard children's voices speaking in a language they didn't understand near the Hollister property. A particularly detailed account comes from a trapper named Silas Thornton, recorded in a statement to Sheriff Garland in January 1901. Was checking my lines about 3 miles east of the Hollister place just after sunset. Heard what sounded like children singing, but in no language I ever heard. Followed the sound to a small clearing. Saw 2 boys, identical in every way except their eyes, one dark, one light. They were moving around the carcass of what looked like a young deer, not yet field-dressed. They were touching it, almost like they were examining it, all the while making these singing sounds back and forth to each other. They didn't use no tools I could see, but they were opening that deer up somehow. When they noticed me watching, they both turned their heads at the exact same moment, looked right at me. Never said a word, but I felt this powerful urge to walk toward them, like they were calling me without speaking. That's when I saw their hands and faces covered in blood in the dying light. I ran. Don't rightly know how far or how long, but when I stopped, I could still hear that singing way off in the distance. There is a short note in Sheriff Garland's log about Thornton's statement that says, "Witness appeared intoxicated. Statement filed. No action warranted." In the spring of 1901, something important happened when a trapper named Hiram Blackwood said he found strange remains in a cave about 4 miles from the Hollister property. The sheriff's report from the 22nd of April 1901 talks about Blackwood's discovery. H. Blackwood reports finding a small cave with animal bones arranged in strange patterns. Some bones look like they were marked with a knife or something similar. There may be a link to reports of cattle mutilations from the previous autumn. No human remains were found. The cave's location was noted for further investigation. It seems that the promised further investigation never happened, because there is no follow-up report in county records. However, Blackwood's personal journal, which his granddaughter gave to the Missouri Historical Society in 1957, has more information that isn't in the official report. Sheriff didn't want to hear the whole of it. Some of them bones weren't just animals. Found 2 small sets of clothes folded neat beside the bone circle. Recognized the pattern on one shirt as same as Hollister boy wore in town a year before. Something ain't right about that cave. Walls had drawings in what looked like blood. Symbols I ain't never seen. Told Garland, but he didn't write it down. Said not to spread stories, would cause panic. Blackwood's journal has a rough drawing of some of the symbols he saw, which he said looked like letters but not from any language I know. When linguist Dr. Harold Matthews looked at these drawings in 1958, he saw that they were similar to some pre-Columbian Native American ideographs, especially those connected to strange Mississippian culture practices. His analysis, which was published in a small number of academic journals, said that the symbols seemed to be connected to beliefs about rituals of consumption and transformation. During the summer and fall of 1901, the Hollister case stopped getting official attention. Jeremiah kept living alone, and no one else officially looked into the disappearances of Martha or the twins. However, WPA writers who collected oral histories in the 1930 seconds say that during this time, settlers in the more remote areas around the Hollister property began to report missing livestock, and sometimes claimed to see 2 small figures moving as one at the edges of their properties, especially at dusk or dawn. A report filed by mail carrier Thomas Grady in September 1901 said, "J. Hollister is getting more and more unkempt and hostile. He won't accept mail saying they read it anyway. The property is falling apart, with multiple windows boarded from the inside. I saw what looked like a new lock system on the front door, with locks on the outside instead of the inside. When I asked Hollister about it, he said, 'Some things must be kept in, not out.' He asked to be moved from the rural route because he was worried about his safety." In February 1902, a terrible winter storm covered the Ozarks in deep snow. This was the last chapter in the documented history of the Hollister family. William McAllister and 2 other men from the area decided to check on the property after Jeremiah didn't show up in Galena for supplies for more than 2 weeks. A letter from McAllister to the sheriff, which is kept in county records, is the main source of information about what they found. "Sheriff Garland, what we found at the Hollister place makes me urge you to act right away. The house was open to the elements, with the door swinging in the wind. Inside, it looks like Hollister was living in just one room, the kitchen, with bedding piled near the stove. The rest of the house was a mess that I can't quite put into words. The walls of the main room are covered in hundreds of the same symbols we saw carved into the trees around the property, drawn in what looks like a mix of charcoal and some dark, rusty substance. The furniture has been arranged in concentric circles around a central point where the floorboards have been torn up, revealing bare earth beneath. Upstairs, we found what looks like Jeremiah's study in disarray, with papers and books torn and strewn about. His journal, which I have kept for you to read, has entries that are getting less and less clear, with the last one dated January 16th. In these last pages, he writes over and over about hearing the twins calling to him from the woods, and about his belief that they were never children at all, but something else wearing the form of children. He says they are still growing at an unnatural rate, and now look like young men instead of 8-year-olds. The most disturbing thing is that he keeps talking about Martha. He writes as if she is still in the house, but in a way he calls the between place. The most disturbing thing we found in the cellar was a door that was heavily reinforced and locked from the outside. Behind this door was a room that looked like it had been lived in for a long time, with dirty bedding, food scraps, and crude drawings scratched into the walls. The drawings show what look like 2 identical figures, and scenes that I can't bring myself to describe in this letter. In the middle of this room, a circle of small bones surrounds what looks like a woman's nightgown laid out as if it still had a body in it, even though there were no remains. The fabric is stained with many dark marks that look like dried blood. There was no sign of Jeremiah himself, but there were footprints in the snow leading from the house into the woods. They looked like the prints of 2 small barefoot people. The trail ended about half a mile into the forest. I beg you to look into this matter as soon as possible, and with the greatest care. Sheriff Garland's official report, which was filed on the 28th of February 1902, says that the Hollister property was found empty, but it doesn't go into as much detail as McAllister's letter. It ends with a simple statement, "J. Hollister presumed missing in winter storm. No evidence of foul play. Case closed, pending discovery of remains." There is no record of Jeremiah Hollister's journal, which McAllister wrote about, being kept in any county or historical archives, and it has never been officially logged as evidence. In 1936, WPA researchers who were writing about Ozark folklore talked to an old man named William McAllister. He said that government men had taken the journal shortly after he gave it to Sheriff Garland. There is no official record to back up this claim. McAllister's interview, recorded by WPA researcher Sarah Jenkins, contains additional details not included in his original letter. The journal was not the work of a sane mind. Pages upon pages of that strange alphabet, interspersed with English entries that made less and less sense as they progressed. The early entries were scientific in nature, observations of the twins' development, detailed notes on their private language, which Hollister claimed to be gradually deciphering. He wrote that the language was not invented but remembered, that the twins were accessing knowledge they could not possibly possess. Later entries became increasingly paranoid. He wrote of the twins watching him constantly, of hearing them whispering outside his door at night. He became convinced they were communicating with something in the woods. The final coherent entry stated, I understand now what Martha tried to warn me about. They are not growing as normal children grow. They are becoming. The hunger is the key to their transformation. What they consume becomes part of what they will be. God forgive me for my blindness. I have fed monsters, disguised as my sons. The Hollister property was still empty after 1902. County tax records show that the state took back ownership in 1908 because the owner didn't pay their taxes. There is no official fire report, but it is said that the house burned down in 1913. Eventually, the land became part of what is now the Mark Twain National Forest. If it weren't for a series of events in the same area in the late 1920s and early 1930s, the case of the Hollister twins might have been forgotten. At least 7 documented cases of missing hikers or hunters happened within 10 miles of the old Hollister property between 1928 and 1932. The missing people were never found, but in 3 cases, their things were found arranged in perfect circles on the forest floor. James Whitaker, a forest ranger, wrote a report in 1933 about finding one such arrangement. Personal effects of missing hunter Calvin Morris, discovered in small clearing approximately 8 miles east of Galena. Items arranged in perfect circle, including wallet, knife, watch, and clothing. No signs of struggle or animal predation. Most unusual aspect was the presence of 2 sets of bare footprints, remarkably small in size, visible in soft earth around the circle. Prints appeared to belong to individuals of identical weight and gait, moving in perfect synchronization. Whitaker's personal log, which was found among his belongings after he died in 1959, contains an entry that is not in the official report. Third such discovery in 18 months. Pattern identical in each case. Circle of personal items. 2 sets of prints. Followed tracks for approximately 1 mile before losing trail at stream crossing. While tracking, experienced unusual auditory phenomenon. What sounded like children singing at a distance, though could not identify direction of sound. Upon returning to clearing, found tokens had been disturbed, despite no other tracks present. Morris's watch was missing. Reported to regional office but received instructions to minimize details in official documentation to prevent public concern. The last known link to the Hollister case is an interview that University of Missouri anthropologist Dr. Margaret Finch did in 1961 with an old woman from Stone County who was only named Mrs. L in the published paper. The woman, who would have been a young girl at the time of the Hollister incidents, recounted a local superstition that had persisted in the region for decades. The old folks always said, "Never go into the deep woods alone, especially not near dusk." They said, "If you hear children singing in the distance, run the other way." The twins still roam those woods, looking the same as they did in 1900. They call to you in their secret language, and if you follow, you'll never be seen again. What they're singing about is their hunger. Some say their mother tried to stop their unnatural appetites, and that's why she disappeared first. Then their father tried to lock them away, but they weren't really children, you see. They were something else wearing children's skin. The woman continued in parts of the interview that were not included in Finch's paper, but were kept in her research notes. "My grandfather was part of the search party that went looking for them boys in 1900. He told me something he never told the sheriff. Said they found a place deep in the woods where the ground had been dug up and what looked like a body buried, then unburied. Said there were pieces missing from it, and those pieces weren't taken by animals. Too neat, he said. Like someone had carefully removed just certain parts. They covered it back up and never reported it. Some things, he said, are better left undisturbed, even if it means justice goes unserved." Dr. Finch's paper, Folklore and Fear, Cannibalism Myths in Ozark Culture, was never published in a formal way. University records show that the manuscript was taken back for revisions in 1962 and never sent back in. Dr. Finch left the university suddenly the same year, supposedly to do field research. After 1962, there is no record of her doing any more academic work in any scholarly database. The last thing she wrote was a letter to a coworker that was found in 1970 among the coworker's things. It said, "I think I've found the cave system described in the Blackwood Journal. The symbols match those I've found in my research. The most amazing thing is that they look like a type of ideograph used in some pre-Columbian practices, but with big changes. If my translations are correct, they describe a process of transformation through consumption, a literal becoming through eating. This reminds me of the European witch tales where eating human flesh was thought to give people certain powers, but this is different, more specific. I think the Hollister case may be a real example of an ancient practice that has survived into modern times. I'll write with full details after tomorrow's expedition to the site. Researchers from the University of Arkansas found a cave that had never been mapped before in Stone County in 1968. It was near the spot described in Hiram Blackwood's journal. The first report said that bones had been arranged in ritualistic ways and that there were strange markings that were similar to those used by Native Americans before Columbus. 2 weeks into the excavation, the survey was suddenly stopped. The university's Department of Anthropology received an official report that said the project was stopped because of dangerous structural conditions in the cave system. There were never any photos or detailed results from the survey published. A graduate student who participated in the survey, interviewed anonymously for a regional folklore study in 1975, provided additional context. What we found in that cave wasn't just Native American. The symbols had similarities to Mississippian culture glyphs, yes, but with significant differences that suggested either an unknown subgroup or deliberate modification over time. The bone arrangements weren't random. They formed precise anatomical reconstructions, but with certain elements substituted animal bones where humans should be, and vice versa. The project leader became increasingly agitated as the excavation progressed, spending hours copying the wall markings and comparing them to some private research materials he wouldn't share with the team. The night before the project was terminated, several team members reported hearing what sounded like children singing in the woods outside our camp. The next morning, the project leader announced we were leaving immediately. The official explanation was structural danger, but the cave showed no signs of instability. Whatever the real reason, it was sufficient for the university to seal all our preliminary findings under restricted access protocols. Even now, hikers in some remote parts of the Mark Twain National Forest sometimes hear what sounds like children singing in the distance, especially around dusk. Park rangers say that these reports are due to the calls of certain bird species that live in the area or the way wind moves through the thick forest valleys, which makes strange sounds. A particularly detailed modern account comes from hiker Daniel Richards, who in 1996 reported to forest rangers was hiking about 10 miles southeast of Galena, well off the marked trails. Late afternoon, starting to think about making camp, when I heard what sounded like 2 children singing in harmony. Couldn't understand the words, didn't sound like English. Followed the sound for maybe 20 minutes, though it never seemed to get closer. Suddenly realized the sun was nearly down and I'd wandered far from my planned route. When I stopped to get my bearings, noticed the singing had stopped too. As I turned to retrace my steps, saw 2 figures watching me from about 50 yards away, partially hidden by trees. Couldn't make out details in the failing light, but they appeared to be young men, identical in appearance, standing perfectly still. Called out to them thinking they might be fellow hikers, but they didn't respond. When I took a step toward them, they stepped backward in perfect unison, maintaining the exact same distance. This continued for several steps, like some kind of bizarre mirror effect. Then, as the last direct sunlight faded, they simply weren't there anymore. No sound of retreat, just gone. Spent a frightening night lost in the woods before finding my way back to a marked trail the next morning. If the Hollister twins ever existed outside of local legend, they would have been dead for a long time by now. But the stories live on, passed down from generation to generation in Ozark families. They warn of 2 identical figures moving through the deep woods, speaking a language only they understand, and driven by an unquenchable hunger. What really happened to the Hollister family in those far-off woods in 1900 is still one of the most mysterious things that happened in Ozark history. The fact that the historical record is incomplete means that we have more questions than answers. Were the twins just unlucky kids? Maybe with mental health problems that their father couldn't handle because he was alone? Was Martha Hollister a victim of domestic violence? And was her disappearance covered up by a fake story? Or is there something to the old saying that people still whisper in the region? Stay out of the deep woods at dusk. And if you hear children singing in perfect unison in a language you can't understand, run and don't look back. The Ozarks forests are huge and old, and maybe some secrets are best left hidden in their depths. But for those who are interested in the darker parts of American history, the case of the Hollister twins is still a disturbing footnote. It shows that the most terrifying monsters aren't always supernatural beings, but the potential for evil that lies dormant in human nature, waiting for the right time and place to come out. Lastly, the Forest Service permanently sealed off the cave system found in the 1968 Archaeological Survey in 1969, supposedly for safety reasons. Official forest maps no longer show the exact location, and public records do not have GPS coordinates for it. Maybe some doors are best left closed after they've been opened, and locked with more than just locks that can be broken from the outside.